And we are live. Welcome, everybody, to Lubbock Compact Live for Wednesday, March 30th. We're almost done with this month. It's about to go into April. We have a special guest with us today. Of course, I'm your host, Adam Hernandez, here with my co-host, Dr. Nick Bergfeld. And our special guest today is Miss Bethany Luna, who is running for District 4 LISD. Welcome to the show, Bethany.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So as always, anybody that's watching, if you have any questions for us or for Bethany as we're going through the show, put those in the comments. We'll be able to see them and respond to them. Or you can just, if you want to make a statement, you can do that as well, and we'll read those off. So let's get right into it. So Bethany, you are running for LISD school board for District 4. I guess we'll start with the question we always ask the candidates, which is what made you want to run for school board?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I have a 2-year-old and I have a 6-year-old, and they're both going to grow up in Lubbock ISD. My 6-year-old will start first grade next year at Honey. So I've had a lot of different variations to this question, and the best answer that I've come at is someone was asking me, what is your deeper why? So my deeper why is that I believe that every student, every teacher, every staff member has a right to be safe, to feel protected, and to be able to live in their true, authentic self. And that's really what I want to bring to the board. I want to bring representation of someone who is biracial. I want to bring representation for the queer community. And I want to ensure that every single time that we bring a discussion to the board, that we're talking about our students and our staff as people and not as numbers. So my day job is a marriage and family therapist, where I help on an individual scale. So I meet with kids and parents and do one-on-one therapy and coaching and things like that. And I really want to be able to bring that to the community as a whole on a larger scale. And so that's my why. That's why I'm here. And I appreciate you meeting with me so that I can get that out into the public and let them know who I am and what I really stand for.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's really great the amount of diversity that we have in this race, and so
Yeah.
I'm all here for it. So you did mention that you're a family and marriage therapist, and so I know you have quite a background in that field. And so could you tell folks, I guess, kind of your origin story, kind of what all you've kind of done throughout your career that I think makes you pretty uniquely qualified for the position. I think that's good for folks to hear. So just run
Sure.
it all down for us.
I'm like, are y'all ready? Sit down because it's been a lot.
Mhm.
So I graduated from Texas Tech with a master's in 2013. My last day of classes was May 7th, and I started working for Lubbock ISD on May 8th.
Wow.
And so I started in the early childhood development program. And so I worked with 0 to 3-year-olds going into our local daycares, and into our families' homes to do parent coaching, parent teaching. And then once I got my full licensure, I was able to move into behavioral assistance for like 2 and 3-year-olds. So children with autism, children with behavior concerns. I predominantly worked on the east side of Lubbock. So that was really like my area, my home. And that's where I spent the majority of my time. While I was doing that, I was also working for the Juvenile Justice Center. So I've spent a lot of time in REACH. I've spent a lot of time in Project Intercept. So I have a familiarity with those programs and the services that they're providing for our children. I understand the benefits and I understand the cons. And then I've also, so from there, I went to work for a foster care agency here in Lubbock and was actually a clinical supervisor for our program called the PTFC program. And this was really focused on kids with very significant and severe behaviors who had 10 to 15 to 20 homes, who had at least had one stint or more in a psychiatric facility. And it was geared towards prevention. And so I spent a lot of time going into classrooms, attending ARDS, attending 504s with those foster parents, and trying to support teachers in managing behaviors. And In April of 2021, I left that job to open my own practice, and right now I'm building a group practice. My goal is to actually train clinicians in how to provide good, appropriate care to a diverse population. And so I'm really excited because I have some new opportunities to really do a lot of training, which I have a heart for because being a good therapist helps provide care, and understanding diversity and how all of that comes together really does shift the way that we're able to support our clients who come. So that's a little bit about my background, and what I feel like I have to offer as a school board candidate, because I have been in the classrooms. I do know and really have a good understanding for students' behaviors. I was in the classroom right after COVID, that first basically year of students coming back. And since then, I've spent a lot of time talking to teachers and trying to understand globally and also individually, like what's going on in behavior in schools with kids.
Awesome.
Bethany, you touched a lot of different parts of the educational system here in Lubbock in your work.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, we look at the Lubbock Compact, we look at the demographics a lot. We look at how those have changed over time, how population demographics, how population growth in Lubbock has changed over time. In the period that you have been working with the youth of the city of Lubbock, what are things that you've noticed changing about the community or changing about the environment or the demographics of youth that you interface with?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I have unfortunately seen a lot of people moving outside of Lubbock ISD. I initially started the majority of my work working in central Lubbock. And over time, I've spent a lot more time out in Friendship, out in Cooper. And so I'd love to see more back in Lubbock ISD and really building that. I think just to be really honest, outside of that, it wasn't something that was in my frame of like thought at the time. So if I had a little bit more time, I could probably give you a more robust answer. But at the time, I was just going in and doing my work and trying really hard to support the kids that I had. And I definitely have felt changes. But it's a little bit hard to articulate in words that make sense outside of just a feeling, if that makes any sense.
No, absolutely. And
Yeah.
from our perspective, oftentimes all we can see, as you mentioned earlier, are the numbers, right? We can see, as you mentioned, we can see the decline in student enrollment in LISD, while Friendship and Cooper have been in the top 5, top 10 fastest growing school districts over the past 10 years now.
Yeah.
Consistently stayed within those rankings. So there's obviously disparities in terms of desirability or where family and growth is typically happening here. I'd say the other major trend that we follow is around poverty, right? And that the number of elementary schools that are eligible for free and reduced lunches universally continues to increase, where now it's my understanding is the majority of LISD campuses sort of fit into that. And so, what we can see in the numbers is that there's increased need when it comes to the student body that LISD is seeing. And I'm curious how you think about these things in the context of inclusive education. How do we ensure that, regardless of where students are coming from, that when they come into one of these schools, that they are getting the same opportunities, or they're having the same sort of programs in place, or haves and have-nots that we've seen historically are getting fixed in some way? How do you see those things moving forward?
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful question. And thank you for highlighting that. I definitely have seen that as well. What I know about learning is that we have different brain states, right? And so we have our prefrontal cortex, which is ready to learn and asking the question, how do I solve this problem? And then we have our limbic system, which is asking the question, am I loved? Do people care about me? It's really focused on connection and emotions. And then we have this bottom part of our brain that is really focused on the question, am I safe? And do I have my like basic secure needs met? And so I'm going to kind of answer your question in a roundabout way. But for me, I think our programs need to really be specific to think about the demographics of the students and where they probably are in their brain state. Because if I have a student who's ready to learn, I can start teaching. And if I have a student who's asking, do you actually care about me? Does anyone care about me? Is there any reason to even be here? I have to solve that problem. I have to answer that question for them and get them up to that learning place before we can even begin the process of teaching. And so I think we do have to find some ways and implement some programs that allow us to see students that way. And I think we can do that culturally in, having teachers outside greeting students in an authentic way. I think we can do that in having our admin out and engaging with students. And I also think we can do that in one-on-one experiences. One PBIS strategy is to have a check-in person. So basically every day you are greeted by one individual who, and PBIS is positive behavior intervention supports, which is actually what Lubbock IC uses. And so we can have individual people set up with that, but we have to ensure that we have enough staff to provide those supports. And so I think, well, I don't think I know. I also know that connection is the single greatest resiliency and barrier to, negative experiences and, social emotional challenges. So we need to ensure that we're providing, that we have enough staff to meet that need, which we don't right now in our schools, and B, that we're funneling money that builds supports, especially for our disadvantaged schools or our schools in poverty, so that we're addressing those needs and getting kids from that lower brain state up into a learning brain state. Otherwise, everything we do is kind of, just running our head into a brick wall. And that's frustrating for students, and it's frustrating for our teachers as well.
Yeah, that actually is a good segue into another question here. So
Sure.
We just talked about the student side of things, and then you did mention a little bit some of the challenges that teachers are dealing with. And I was wondering how you think. Obviously, you're in the schools a lot. You see a lot of things. What do you think about the overall culture? Is the overall culture of LISD right now one that's good for teachers? And if there are some gaps there, or maybe some room for improvement, what are some things you're thinking about, or what are some things you think could help to help the teachers?
Sure. So that's actually one of the first questions that I ask teachers whenever I sit with them to kind of find out, like, hey, what's going on? Because the reality is I do work alongside teachers, but I'm not a teacher. I don't have their extra workload. I don't have their initiatives. I don't have the extra tutoring, all of those sorts of things. And so I can make those decisions as an outsider or someone who sees it and be like, oh, here's the problem and here's how you fix it. Mm-hmm. Or I can go to teachers and say, like, hey, you're living this every day. Like, what would be helpful? And so I have really put it on my heart to sit with a lot of teachers to ask them those questions, because when and if I do win, I don't just want to be a random person with power telling them what they should and should not do and what should and should not work for them. I really want to hear their voice and make sure that I use that platform as a way to amplify their voice. So during my time sitting with teachers, what I have heard is that it doesn't feel super open. The culture doesn't feel attentive or responsive to what teachers have to say. And often there's this sense of decisions are made, and we're the secondary, like, oh, I'm covering my bases. Let's send an email that says, hey, how do you feel about this? But it doesn't actually feel authentic. right? So I've heard a lack of trust, a lack of transparency, and a lack of safety. Excuse me. What I think is super important is we have to revamp all of that and make sure that our teachers feel safe, that they feel protected, and that they feel like we're being honest and truthful with them. So I've talked about this quite a lot in my interviews, but I think it's a top-down experience and a bottom-up. And so what I mean by that is I think as a school board, we have to ensure that we're creating open spaces where teachers can be heard and where they're asked questions before it's too late, right? So before a decision has been made, they have to feel like someone's actually listening to hear and not listening to placate. The other thing that I think is really important, from a bottom-up perspective, is really going directly to teachers in one-on-one experiences, ensuring that they feel like there's an open door policy, that they can send board members an email and get a response and feel heard, that they can attend school board meetings. In the way that things work out right now, it is very difficult for teachers to be there, and it's hard for me to be there, and I'm running for school board. I take my daughter to school every morning. So it's to her school, right? She goes to the CDRC, she's 2, but it's her school. And so that's a hard time for parents, for teachers. And so I think if we don't change the time, then we've got to ensure a way for our teachers to be heard.
Yeah. I was curious if you could talk a little bit about District 4. So there was a little bit of shifting, so the census data came out. There was some amount of shifting of the districts and where they are, things like that. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about, what is District 4 to you? What does that entail? What is there? And maybe a little description for folks out there who don't necessarily know which district they're in, because it's kind of hard. It took me district I was in. I had to do maybe a couple Google searches, click through a couple different websites. Then I got the outdated PDF that was the old district boundaries. It's not something that, I don't know how most people figure this out, but it's not intuitive.
So I actually contacted the election county office and was like, hey, I need you to send me a PDF that I can read and make sense. Please help a kid out. So it's on my website. So I'm about to describe it, but if people want to find it, you can always just find me on Facebook or Instagram or at my website, which is www.bethanyluna4district4.com. And that's 4 FOR and then 4 the number. I didn't think that through very well. It made a lot of sense in my head, but the first time I had to say it out loud, I was like, oh, Beth. But so the lines for District 4 are from 34th to 98th from University to Quaker. And then I have a small subshot of Overton Elementary, which is 19th to 34th from Indiana to Quaker. And so that is the area. Those are the people who can vote for me. If you feel like I'm a good candidate for you. I love your vote and your support and all that good jazz. So in reference to talking a little bit about my district, it has changed quite a lot. The last one incorporated some other schools and had a whole nother area. And so when it changed, I was like, oh, wow, this is different. What specifically, I guess, are you asking me about that change in the district? Are you curious about how I feel about that, about resource allocations? I guess I want to make sure I answer the question well.
When you think about District 4, what stands out about the district? Versus not necessarily by comparison to other districts, but what is it about District 4 that resonates with you when you think about it?
Yeah, I think it has. One of the things that I think is cool about District 4 is it has some really well-performing schools, and it has some schools that are struggling in performance. And so when I think about my district specifically, I what's important to me is I want to celebrate our schools that are doing well. I want to look at the programs they have, what they're doing well, and I want to figure out, can we recreate those in our other schools who are struggling, or do we need to be creative? You know, one of my jobs as a therapist is to kind of see everything systemically as a whole, identify the patterns of whatever the concern is, and then start to implement some challenges to those, and see how things kind of change and people respond. And so what I like about my district is that there is a lot of diversity in it, and there is, you know, from one side to the other side, we have big changes in performance across schools, which I think to me is a benefit, because I can look at the schools in my district that are performing really well and figure out, would that be appropriate to implement here? And if not, because the demographics are different, socioeconomic status is different, diversity is different, then what does this school need to really support those students? Because like I said earlier, like, we got to make sure that our kids are in learning brain for them to be successful. So I think it takes a lot of intention and attention to the demographics of our students, and also of our teachers, right? And what people are bringing, and then figuring out from there how to be helpful.
Yeah, that's really good. Really good. So I guess the next question I have is a two-part question. So I guess the first part would be, what has your experience been? Because I know you've never run for anything before. So what has your experience been through this whole journey so far? And then the second part would be, what would be a message that you would have for anybody else who may think either they would like to run for something eventually, or maybe somebody that may be out there thinking, I can't do that. What would your message be to the folks out there?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. I love that. Yes, this is by far my first time doing anything like this. Previously to now, I was not very politically involved or inclined. I saw that there were lots of problems and thought, like, I'm going to help the individuals and I'll let other people help the community, and like, they're going to do a great job. So for me, what I think is important to someone who may want to, is to know that representation is everything. So I was actually on a TikTok video. I don't know, I don't TikTok, but I was on some TikTok video, and people were talking about me and being queer, and it had like 10,000 views in like just a couple of days. And I had people start messaging me and reaching out to me. And so it's really beautiful to see representation. And if you can get people who think like you, and who understand or feel like you understand them, like, that's really where your jam is. And it's so helpful to get communities together, and let them know who you are and what you care about. And whether I win or whether other people win in the future, like, my hope, and I very much believe that this will be true. My hope is that every single queer kid, every single biracial kid in Lubbock ISD knows, if they hear about me, if they see my name, if they're like, oh, that Bethany Luna girl lost, or, oh, she won, you know, whichever way, that they'll know, like, man, there's someone out there being successful. Like, there's a reason to keep going. I want to be like her one day. And not because I want that kind of recognition, but because I want them to feel like they can be successful and like they can have good things and grow. Being a poor Hispanic kid, you know, and that's how I positioned myself when I was growing up, even though I'm very white passing, Puerto Mexicana all day. I didn't really fit with the white kids because my last name was Luna, and I didn't really fit with the Mexican kids because I was too white. And so it was hard to find a place that I fit, you know, and I've grown up and I've figured that out. And I'm thankful for those experiences because it grew me in a lot of ways and made me pretty stubborn and a little bit defiant, which I think is good in situations like this, because it's not always easy, and there's a lot of pushback. And when you try to create change, people don't always like that. And they want to tell you to get back in your place. And so I think that's another really important part is it's a risk and it requires vulnerability. And so just make sure you're ready to pay the cost of it. And then do it and do it hard and know that whether I win or lose, there's going to be people who know that they can be successful too one day. And that's really awesome.
And I love that you have that understanding, that awareness of, I think in some ways there can be a feeling of pressure of knowing the uniqueness of what it is that you're doing here. Even in my own life, so I grew up in Lubbock, and friends of mine who grew up as part of the LGBTQ community here talk about the feelings of isolation that they experienced as children, and the difficulties of being able to express themselves or feeling as though that they were part of a community that just simply judged them as, in the biblical context, and this is things that they would hear to their face, an abomination. And when I was at Lubbock High School, that was when the student body actually attempted to create a gay-straight alliance, and famously was actually one of the few times where that group or the school itself LISD prevented the formation of that organization. And there was a court case that was ultimately lost, and the assumption there was that if they had appealed, they likely would have gotten that overturned, but there wasn't the financial wherewithal to continue to pursue that legal action. So I think about that a lot. What is the messaging for a child, say who was at Lubbock High at that time, who was not being able to openly express their gender identity or their sexual identity, and seeing that happen, right? The effectively the prevention of creation of the student organization. And I just think about it, the impacts that has when you see those little things day in, day out of elements of discrimination, essentially, or othering. And for you to be able to have this conversation, to present yourself, and to want to have a dialogue about various, how do we pursue inclusion in education? How do we take a more holistic approach to the student body is one, just refreshing, and I think inspiring as well. I think it's great that you have that understanding that there's a historical nature to what it is that you're doing.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that very much. And, my intention was not to run on that platform initially. Like, I really intended to kind of keep that closer to the chest, not hide who I am, because I couldn't even if I wanted to, but to be really careful. And I'm so grateful to this little farmer in Espermont, Texas. I won't share her name just to be respectful, but I called her up and said, "Hey, I heard you support the human rights campaign. I'm really looking for some donations. I've got to get some flyers and some signs made. And would you be willing to support me?" And I said, I knew she was safe, right? Because that for me is a legitimate concern. Like, am I safe in this space? And I knew I was safe. And so I was like, I want you to know I'm a queer woman and I'm running. And she immediately just started crying and said, "I can't believe you're willing to do this. Like, this is so beautiful. This is going to be so great for the kids to be able to see." And, and I was like, okay, like that is the communication I needed to know, that is the right thing to do. That there, and I, in my job, I work with the LGBTQIA plus youth often, particularly in Lubbock, and hear about some of the things that occur at Lubbock ISD and the other ISDs, and the discrimination and the othering and all the things that you mentioned. And so I thought, well, I'll be more open when I win, and because that's my goal, right? When I win. Mm-hmm. And I spoke to her and I was like, okay, I can't wait until I'm successful, right? Because that is giving into the culture. The culture of West Texas is don't be too loud until you're accepted, and make sure they like you before you speak out. And I just decided I couldn't do that once I heard her response. And so since then, I've really changed the way that I've run my campaign. And, I used to not have I am queer or I am gay or I'm a lesbian or whatever word I put in a moment to quantify who I am. But that was my reason why, because it was so moving to this woman. And I had a very long conversation with her. I asked her kind of what her story was. And essentially she had a child come out in the 90s. And she just wanted the world to be different. She wanted him to feel safe. She wanted kids nowadays to feel safe. And it's so important to her that it created, an emotional response whenever I told her that. And so that's why I'm here today, because people need representation. They need to feel seen. They need to feel accepted, and they need to feel like someone understands. While my story isn't the same as every student in Lubbock IC, I definitely understand that, but there are some similarities that you just can't get around. So.
Right. And I even teared up in thinking about your story and the discussion of it. I have a friend, an older friend, who she lived her entire life, a single, closeted, because she was an LISD school teacher and believed that would compromise her with an LISD. And this was not that long ago. And she actually was not able to openly live as a lesbian, have a partner, until she retired, was how she felt she needed to live her life. And when I say that's not that far back, I'm not even talking 10 years, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're in LSD. And so the representation and why that's valuable, I know it, I believe it. I've seen in my own life why this mattered to folks. And so I'm happy that you've seen this actually as a benefit, as a strength in those conversations of moving the dialogue forward, advancing the dialogue forward here in the Lubbock community about what does leadership look like and what does representation look like.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and we do have a comment from District 1 Community Source, and they say, as a parent, I have noticed that parent involvement has dropped because we feel that LISD is keeping us out. There's more to have successful schools, I guess is what they're trying to say. And it says school plus parent involvement equals success, and that's on your campaign. So this kind of goes back to the point of because we have heard this on the teacher side, but we've also heard on the parent side as far as a lack of transparency. And I think this speaks to the whole culture thing, because when you talk about the culture of a school, you have the kids, you have the teachers and staff, and then you have the parents, and then you have the school board. And so right now it doesn't appear that those things are all in line. And so do you have any ideas? I know you spoke a little bit about some ideas on the teacher side and the student side. Do you have any ideas that maybe the school board could do to maybe, I guess, take a more active role in reaching out to parents or informing parents? Because I think, I just have a feeling that a lot of parents are not staying disconnected on purpose. So do you think, are there any ideas that you have that could help in that area?
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate the question. Thank you. And Adam, I 100% agree with you. I've talked to teachers, and one of the things that they say is like, how can we get more parent involvement? And then I've talked to people who were parents before they started working for Lubbock ISD, and they were basically shut down. I've talked to teachers who say that they want more parent involvement and they can't get it. So, when I become a board member, I'm one of 7, right? And so there's a lot of common ground and creating, cohesiveness around some of the ideas that I have. But, one thing I have is like, why can't we have a forum where we bring parents in and say like, hey, y'all aren't involved. Like, what's going on? We send out, do what?
That's such a great observation, right?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Has there ever been a root cause analysis of why the parent,
Yeah.
we all say, everybody here's a reason, we all think our own reasons. but I've actually never seen an attempt to quantify or put to the parents,
Yeah. I mean, my master's, I ended up not doing a thesis because I chose to do some other things, but like my thesis would have been a qualitative study. And so what that means is that I wanted to go to people and hear their stories and understand, so that then I could take that and make themes to act off of, right? So that's very much how I think about this. Like, I want to hear from parents, why do you feel like you're not involved? Like, or why you're not, is it administration that doesn't feel open? Is it teachers that don't feel open? And then what do we need to do at a school board level to ensure that our superintendent is managing that appropriately? Because like, I definitely there's a ladder, and as a superintendent member, I would be very high up on the board, right? And so I'm not always going to have one-on-one interaction with teachers or parents or anything like that. But I think in the beginning, as we're trying to create change, it's a great place to start in creating safety and trust within the community. So my first thing is, why can't we have a parent forum to hear from parents who want to be involved but feel like they can't, the reasons why? And then the second thing is, are we making it easy for parents to be involved? And B, are we reaching out in a way that it feels safe and comfortable to do so? My assumption is that if our teachers don't feel safe, our parents probably don't feel super safe. So there's something happening within our district that says questions aren't a good idea, right? And that's an assumption. I'd have to talk to people to know that, but just based on what I'm hearing, that feels like a part of it. So we've just got to bring people in by being open. And I think we do that on a grand scale through a forum in a way that's manageable, right? We could take up a couple of schools at a time, but why couldn't we do that?
Yeah. Yeah. And we have a couple of comments here from Leah. She says, the district PTA has only an annual meeting with the superintendent. I know the PTA wants more support. That's the first of her comment. The second comment is, it would be great to have a report from the PTA at the trustee meetings. So apparently, from her perspective, the folks in the PTA don't feel much support from the superintendent. And I think it's a good idea as far as PTA report. We also have a comment from Lisa. She says, my children's elementary fights me tooth and nail from being involved. It's so frustrating. That's not a good report. Another one from Leah. When the parents do speak up, we are often just given basic answers. Now, this is something when I was involved in the advocacy around trying to keep Dupree Elementary from closing, excuse me. This is something that I quickly deduced as well. I felt that questions, to me, it felt like questions were being answered in almost a patronizing way. Basically, I'm going to give you this answer and you're going to accept it, whether it makes sense or whether you have a rebuttal to it or not. And so I kind of feel that pain. So yeah, definitely some things to work on there. And so, yeah. Yeah.
There's one topic that I want to touch on, because it's part of your professional career, and it's one of the challenges in OIC today around juvenile justice, right, and juvenile detention and the correctional programs that we have. At a high level, how do you feel about the way that we do juvenile correction, how we do diversion programs, how we do intercept? Is that a model that makes sense? Some people say that some of the things that we do, we're criminalizing the students too quickly. Sometimes the harshness of the penalties just really are above and beyond, right? Are some of the critiques that folks have said in the past. What has been your perspective on that process, and whether it's something that needs reform?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that question. I would like to comment and just say to the people who have had experiences, who are trying to reach out and feeling like you're being stifled, like, I'm sorry that that's happening, and that's not the way that it's supposed to be. Like, we should be praising our parents who want to advocate for their kids, and breaks my heart that we're not, as a school district and as a board, more open to that and more open to dialogue, right? Like the reality is we can't answer all of the questions and we can't necessarily do everything that parents want, but we should at least respond in a respectful and kind way that says, I hear you and I see you, and here's the reasons why I can't, and that be truthful and honest. So I just wanted to say that, and then I'll get back to your question, Nick. So such a loaded question, right? I definitely think that there's a place for consequences, for, punishment and discipline. But I definitely think there's a lot of space, and research is very clear that like negative reinforcement is pretty unsuccessful, right? And so we have PBIS. I would really love to get inside the district and find out a little bit more about how it's being implemented. Some of our schools have social emotional learning providers on staff and on site. Some of our schools do not. And so that's not consistent across the board, which I see as a concern. I think we should be focused and putting more energy into prevention rather than punishment. And so I don't know all of the programs the Lubbock ISD has. Like I know we have some, and I know that some are really beautiful and amazing, and some the intention is beautiful and it just doesn't necessarily work the way that it was intended because it's implemented at a global scale and not on an individual scale for each student. And so my answer to you is kind of roundabout in that I'd rather just spend more energy on prevention and less on having to funnel kids into programs. Like, I mean, I don't know, have y'all ever been to Reach?
No.
It feels very much like a prison, and every time I go there,
Project Intercept does, yeah.
Yeah, I haven't been there in a little while since they changed it, but I mean, I feel like Reach is even more than that. Almost every time I go there, I am having to be funneled a different way, or I have to walk outside to get to the room I need to be to. And that's pretty traumatizing. Like for our kids who are already in a place of struggle, they're experiencing more trauma in these outbursts. And we have a bunch of students put together who are in a place of struggle. And I do love the program. I think they're doing some really beautiful things. But when I talk to teachers, what I hear them say, I could have identified that kid in rephrase. I did identify that kid in second grade, and I tried to reach out to my administrators and I tried to tell people that this was a concern. And they just didn't want to hear me very much, or the parents weren't involved in this situation that I'm speaking of, or whatever the case may be. And so I think like we need to be building a culture that changes and addresses a lot of those things about how to function in a school setting, in kindergarten, in preschool. The very first time a kid steps into our school system, we need to start addressing a lot of those concerns: emotional regulation, frustration tolerance, all of those programs. I believe we should be spending much more time on prevention rather than punishment.
Yeah, great answer.
Yeah.
Great answer. Yeah, and so Leah has one more comment. She says, for the Title I schools, there are parent input surveys, and I know that I have suggested many things that fell on deaf ears. So more of the same sounds like. So yeah, that to me, that sounds like an important change.
Yeah.
Just coming from a leadership background myself, I find that in order to create the kind of environment that fosters the most success, because you're never going to have something that works 100% perfect, but in order to foster that type of environment, first of all, people need to feel safe. People need to feel that they can talk to not only their peers, but folks that are in positions higher than they. Folks need to feel like the situation is fair, that things are being dealt with in a consistent way across the board. And then they just need leadership that will listen. And if you have those things, people feel just the basic human respect that everybody would like to feel when they're dealing with other human beings. And so when you do that, though it's not always going to look pretty, I mean, people are going to disagree, it's going to happen, but it makes a situation to where you can move forward a lot easier than one where you don't have that, because then you have what there appears to be, to me at least from the outside looking in LISD, is you end up with chaos if you don't have that. And it really does start with the leadership. And so I pray that we are able to get some folks in there that are maybe thinking in these ways. I think that we need a change. This is one of the most important institutions that we have, period, not just here, but everywhere. And I find myself more and more as this situation goes on, thinking about those teachers. And, I've said it on this program before, I'll say it again. I feel like that we should respect them and take care of them as if they are first responders, because they save our lives in a different way. Yep. And they provide so much of a service to the community, and they do it in such a selfless way, just as any other first responder would do. And I think that they're worthy of the dignity and respect, and I think that we should really back them up. And so, hoping that this election cycle can do something better for our teachers and the whole school situation at large. So that's my rant of the evening. And so we will go ahead and let Bethany, you can let everybody know where they can find you, how they can help with your campaign, and all that good stuff.
For sure. I'd like to add one more comment. So there is actually statistics that show that the first session of therapy is the most beneficial, and that clients have the most significant amount of change. And it's all about feeling seen and heard and understood. And so there is never as great of a jump in positive response as that first session. And that's really what I want to bring to the board, and to our teachers, to our parents, and to our students, for the ones who are active and involved. So I just wanted to share that because I feel like that's really important. So yeah, you can find me on Facebook. Bethany Luna for District 4 is my page. I have an Instagram, Bethany Luna for District 4, and my website is www.bethanylunaforddistrict4.com. So I just kept it simple. And then also I am having an event on April 30th at Miller Park. I'm going to do yoga. We're going to have face painting, maybe a jump house. I'm not quite sure if we're going to be able to get that together with the city, but we're working on it. And some art. And so we really want this to be a place for kids to come out and have a good time, and for parents and teachers to have an opportunity to relax and that's not the right word. Relax and rest. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah. And what's the date on that again?
April 30th.
April 30th. And you said at Miller Park?
Yes. And there's a Facebook event. So if you forget any of the details, you can find it there.
Awesome. Well, everybody make sure you check out Bethany Luna on all of her socials and her website. And I'm sure she would be happy to have your vote if you would give it to her. But that's your decision. So check her out on everything. I hope you enjoyed the show. And this is going to be your weekly reminder to join your neighborhood association. And we will see you all back here next Wednesday.
Thank you all for having me. Thank you for your time.